and I'm glad to represent to our audience our colleague from United States, Woodrow Barfield. He is a speaker, a lecturer, and author who served as professor, as at engineering at the University of Washington, but also like a specialist in intellectual property law, as I understand. And of course, our colleague prepared some research by himself and with his colleagues in cyber humans, our future with machines, and many other interesting works. And let me introduce myself. My name is Yulia Kharitonova. I'm a doctor of law from Moscow State University. And we've got a center, research educational center of legal studies of artificial intelligence and digital economy. It's both interesting for lawyers in Russia, maybe not only in Russia. And according to our agenda, the floor is yours, dear Professor Barfield.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I will share my screen.
Yes, it's okay.
Okay, so you can see my screen, okay?
Yes.
All right. Yeah. So thank you so much for inviting me and for that introduction. A little bit more about my background. I have a PhD in engineering, and then I have 2 degrees in law. And I'm currently visiting professor in law and technology at the University of Turin. And I'm also a member of the Whitaker Institute, and I have other affiliations as well, which no point in discussing right now. Okay. So this is the work that I've been primarily doing recently, as a further introduction to myself. And you can see I've been either authoring books or I've been co-editing books that have been on law, artificial intelligence, law, and algorithms. And I have 2 books that's one of my main interests, which is on cyber humans or cybernetic humans, or essentially on the topic of the technological enhancement of the human body. So I'm interested in all of that from a legal point of view. I'm interested in how artificial intelligence can enter the body through implants, and what are the implications for the law. So a lot of times when I give a talk like this to a legal audience, because some of the technology is being used now, but some is not actually being used currently. They think maybe this is a talk that's more science fiction than reality. But the point I want to make is that the technology that I'm going to talk about and the legal issues are current issues. And the technology is either working now or will be probably within 5 to 10 years at the most. These kind of issues are going to be brought up. So further introducing really the main topic. Here you can see a bunch of different images that have technology implanted within the body. So we have heart pacers, we have a electrode planted in the motor cortex of a person to decrease tremors for Parkinson's disease and so on. So I have a couple of ideas here. One is that a lot of the technology being implanted in the body is currently being done for medical necessity, right? For medical necessity. But a point that I want to make throughout this entire talk is that what's being used for medical necessity now is going to be used for other purposes in the future. So once you can get technology in the brain, it's going to be used it could be used for interesting applications, which raises many different interesting issues in law. So here I want to talk about the characteristics of the type of technology that I'm talking about. So there are a lot of definitions for what is human enhancement technology and what are cyborgs. So we all probably have a good understanding what artificial intelligence and algorithms are. There might not be one definition we agree on for those terms, but we all have a pretty good idea of what we mean by the term artificial intelligence and algorithms. But for purposes of this talk, I conceptualize human enhancement technology and cyborgs, people that are equipped with technology, and the technology then allowing artificial intelligence to enter the body. So this is the way I think about it. So it's a person that's equipped with technology, and you can see there's an image for each one of my points. The technology is more and more controlled by thought. So that's a person that's able to control his prosthetic arm by an implant via thought. The technology can be upgraded. The point that the technology can be upgraded, I think, is really interesting, because that means if you have an humans are born with a biological arm, and as we age, our arm ages as well. But the fact that if you can have an artificial prosthetic arm that can be replaced with upgrades, then essentially your arm can kind of reverse age. It can kind of get younger. It doesn't have to age. Anyway, the technology is closed loop. That's another characteristic of enhancement technology and cybernetic technology. So, and that actually relates to the point number 2, that it's controlled by thought through a closed loop system. And most importantly, the technology changes the computational capabilities of the body. So that's how I visualize this set of technology that's allowing artificial intelligence and algorithms to enter the body. And as I'll talk about in more detail later, there are lots of really interesting legal and policy issues raised by these kind of developments. So here I want to talk about a little bit about what the future may bring. And so I want to make the point that in the image you see in the middle of this slide, AI algorithms implanted in the body through technology. So we can partition that 2 different ways. So the first way is through medical necessity. So the purpose of medical necessity, of course, is to restore the body to a normal state of functioning. So from a cognitive point of view, from a motor point of view, medical necessity, we implant technology in the body because we want to restore a person to what we consider to be a normal state of function. And the other side of the slide, where you see a finger with a magnet, well, that's a finger. That's actually a finger that has a magnet implanted within the finger, and the person that has the magnet in the finger is able to detect magnetic fields and to do things like that. That's not medical necessity. I don't know whether you're familiar with this gentleman, Neil Harbison, who's on the far right of the slide, but he's very color deficient, and he's wearing essentially a sensor that converts color into sound. So he's able to convert color into sound. So Neil will get up and he'll look at he'll get a meal, breakfast or lunch or dinner, and he looks at it and he says, I wonder what my meal sounds like. So we would look at it and go, I wonder what our meal tastes like. But he's converting color into sound. So he says, I wonder what my meal sounds like. So I wonder what my clothes sound like. So that's really interesting. But obviously, that's an application that a lot of people wouldn't consider being medical necessity. Then I've got an image that's a telephoto lens. So I show a picture for medical necessity. I show a retinal prosthesis, right? So for people with macular degeneration and diseases like that, to try to get them back to a normal state of functioning or towards being normal. Well, a telephoto lens, if we could be equipped with the telephoto lens, we could zoom in and zoom out of a scene and so on. So that's more than medical necessity. So is it okay if I show say about a 2-minute video here?
Yes, I think it's possible.
Okay, good, I'll do that. Let's see. So the video I want to show, I actually have lots of examples, but I just want to show a video. Again, the video will be medical necessity, but I want you to keep in mind that once technology is implanted in the mind, It can be used for other purposes, purposes that the law is going to be very, very interested in. I mean, not that there aren't a lot of legal issues associated with implanting medical technology into a person's body to begin with, but there'll be that set of issues. And in addition, there's going to be a whole additional set of issues when technology is implanted in the body for non-medical purposes. All right, so let me show you an interesting example that'll be maybe 2 minutes or so.
UCSF researchers have shown that full words and sentences can be decoded from the brain activity of a person with paralysis who is unable to speak. Dr. Edward Chang's team worked with a brainstem stroke survivor who lost the ability to articulate words 15 years ago. The man has relied on other limited means to communicate. In this study, an electrode device was implanted over the brain area that normally controls the vocal tract. A question was displayed for the participant, and the device recorded brain activity while he attempted to speak in reply. A computer algorithm translated the brain activity patterns into words and sentences in real time. The computer algorithm was trained to differentiate among 50 words that could generate over 1,000 sentences. Words were decoded with up to 93% accuracy at 18 words per minute. This is the first time brain activity in the speech cortex of a paralyzed person has been decoded into full words. The advance paves the way for new technology to restore natural and rapid communication for people with severe paralysis.
So that particular, I actually have other interesting videos. And so from that video, you might say, well, who would want to get an implant like that? I mean, only for medical necessity, only if you were severely disabled. The other video and some of the other stuff that I would have showed you if I had more time to show videos would have been actually an example of circuits that fit within a blood vessel, that are within the person's brain itself. So the circuits in blood vessels in the brain. So it's less intrusive, in other words. Are able to detect thought, are able to detect brain activity. So we're making progress in things like this. Okay, so here I want to just point out what I think is a really incredibly interesting technology to get artificial intelligence, to get algorithms in the brain. And that's an artificial hippocampus. So the hippocampus is a part of the brain that stores memory. It's incredibly important for long and short-term memory. And right now, there's a professor, Theodore Berger at the University of Southern California, is one of the key people developing an artificial hippocampus. And it's being developed to help people with Alzheimer's disease, right? That are having memory deficiencies due to aging, due to Alzheimer's. And this particular technology is very close to being used with in human trials with people. So that's the state of the art. That's how fast that technology is progressing. But something like an artificial hippocampus is interesting because it's where memory is stored. As I will talk about in more detail, if we can put technology where memory is stored in the brain, then will we edit memories? Will we be able to erase memories and things like that? So the point I want to make here is that I believe that to sort of support everything I've said thus far, I believe that there's a migration of technology. So this is a trend that's been occurring since essentially since humans first evolved, you know, whatever that was, 200 to 300,000, 400,000 years ago. So the trend is that, first of all, the tools that we made are external to our body. They're migrating to our body, the surface of our body, and that's a digital. Well, first I started off with some really primitive tools, and then on the body is a digital tattoo that's on the surface. There are other technologies that you know about that are on the surface of the body. For example, your glasses. And then another trend in the migration of technology is to the body, integrated in the body itself, which is the image I show on the right with implants. So migration of technology from the external world to the surface of the body to inside the body. And likewise, a migration of artificial intelligence from external to the body to internal to the body as well. Now, it's interesting to think about the time frame for doing this, the time frame for doing things like this. So it took a few 100,000 years before primitive tools were replaced by more sophisticated tools. But we're living in a time of accelerating returns for technological advances. And so now we've got the potential for thousands of years of progress occurring in a period of 1 century. So by the end of the century, it's possible that all biological parts could be artificial. That's some people are working to try to make that happen. Okay, so other than medical necessity, I mean, are there people that actually want to have technology implanted in their body? And the answer is yes, there are. And in fact, there's a group of people, they're called grinders, but they, cyber enthusiasts, they have lots of different names. This is the group of people, and you can see in this example, that are actually implanting technology in their body without a medical physician. They're doing it at tattoo parlors and places like that. They're doing it in their homes. But these are the group of people that want to become cyborgs. They want to be post-human. They want to equip themselves with other kinds of abilities and so on. And so they're experimenting with implanting technology with their own body. So I think that's really interesting. So in a way, it's really all about memory. It's really about what we can do with artificial intelligence and implants to affect our consciousness, to affect our memories and things like that. I mean, that's where so many legal issues are going to be important. And here I just want to make a couple of points. One of them is that there's a technique called optogenetics. Optogenetics, without going into detail, essentially allows us to record the circuits associated with the memory, and then to transfer them to the mind of another subject. So it's been done with rats. It's been done with the subjects were rats. So a rat was in what is called a Skinner cage, one of those cages where they press a lever for food or water reinforcement, things like that. And they shocked it, and they essentially, with optogenetics, recorded the circuits that reacted to that. And then they were able to innervate or stimulate the same circuits, create that circuit in the mind of another animal that had never experienced that event. And the other animal acted as if it had that memory. So that's an example of the transfer of a memory from one animal to another. So we're doing lots of research to try to do that for various reasons. Okay, so for the remainder of my talk, I'll focus a little bit more on law and policy as related to human enhancement and cybernetic technology. So one of the biggest issues is the idea of cognitive liberty, that we have essentially freedom of the mind. So if you have an implant in your body, not only your brain, but your body in general, that's probably going to be wirelessly connected. And if it's wirelessly connected, that means there's a potential for a third party to be able to access it. And so that would then bring up issues such as privacy, whether you can be overtly controlled externally. And in terms of intellectual property, the ownership of ideas, and the major umbrella issue of cognitive liberty itself. We've been concerned with the issue of cognitive liberty within law and policy already, and there have been cases decided. And at the end of this talk, if you want me to review an interesting case, I can, but to make sure I get through the talk, I'll continue at this point to the next slide. So given that we're there's a movement to, migration of technology to the body and then to external inside the body for various reasons. How do we regulate that technology? That's, of course, if it's for medical necessity, it's heavily regulated currently. Okay, so it's heavily and I hope that RZN is actually the Russian government agency that regulates implanted technology. I'm not sure, but I think that's the case. But in the United States, we regulate medical technology, whether it's implanted in the body or not. But medical technology by the Federal Drug Administration, the FDA. On this slide, I just want to show that there's an extensive process of getting technology in the body to be approved by government regulations. So there's a long and drawn out process that has to happen. Notice that there's a class 1, class 2, and class 3 classification device. Class 3 devices, again, this is US law, the US Federal Drug Administration. And every country, I think, has an equivalent government agency. But the class 3 devices are implanted devices such as pacemakers, implanted cerebral stimulators, anything like that, the type of technology that I've been showing you. And the risk level is very high. And so the regulations are very strenuous to get to the point where you could do such a thing. But since we're talking about getting artificial intelligence and algorithms in the body, in this slide, I just want to show all the different kind of ways and, all the different body parts that people are currently looking at and are interested in. And that could be a means of getting AI and algorithms into the body to increase the computational capabilities of the bodies, or just to monitor the lots of different control loops that occur within the body for your health. So from brain to machine interface at the top, all the way down to an artificial foot. So lots of different places where technology can be implanted. Well, obviously, this type of technology is another way that it gets regulated by law is through patent law. Here's an example of a U.S. patent, and what so patents come with images, so you know how it's enabled. But this just shows an electrode that's implanted within the motor cortex. This is a patent for an electrode implanted in the motor cortex of somebody. So I'm sure its purpose is to provide electrical current, probably for depression, to treat depression, or for tremors for a Parkinson's patient, something like that. But patent law is one way, of course, that we regulate technology in the body. So it's not just hardware that we need to be concerned with in terms of regulating it and what the policies should be as we become equipped with more cybernetic type technology. But we also need to be concerned with regulating the software. And not only the software, but spectrum itself, right? So whatever government agency in different jurisdictions regulates spectrum, I mean, because the technology is mostly going to be wirelessly connected. So many government regulatory agencies is involved in this type of technology. And in the US, the FDA released an AI machine learning based software, what they called an action plan. So it's not in effect yet. They asked for public and legal scholarship feedback on the plan that they're developing, and we're going through that process. But again, so we want to interested in regulating the hardware and the software and the spectrum. And so in terms of spectrum, the Federal Trade Commission, another government agency in the US, prohibits the use of artificial intelligence that is not truthful, that could be deceptive, or it's not backed up by evidence. And We all know about the European Union's GDPR regulations for data protection. They have something called a provision against subliminal techniques beyond a person's consciousness in order to that would materially distort a person's behavior. And so that's interesting. So if we were to, if the government or industry had a way to hack into or legally to access implants in your mind, we would want, that's a scary thing, by the way, but we would want, I mean, it would have to be truthful. It'd have to be honest. It would have to be regulated. Okay, so are there cases on things like this? And the answer is yes, there are cases that deal with implantable technology, and there are cases that deal with software as well that we know about. This is just a typical case where somebody was injured by a hip replacement. So they had an artificial hip implanted in their body. It didn't work very well. They suffered a lot of pain, and it was classified as a type 3 medical device. And so the person that was injured sued the manufacturer of the device under different legal theories, probably tort law, negligence, product liability, things like that we have in common law jurisdictions. But there are actually many cases that get litigated on technology implanted in the body that fails in some way or doesn't live up to its promise. This particular case made it all the way to the 7th Circuit, which is one step below the Supreme Court in the US. So that's a very high level court that heard the case. So as I said, we're really interested in the potential for our cognitive liberty to be disrupted in some way by implantable technology. And for centuries, I think it's been common knowledge that the human mind is the ultimate domain of absolute protection from external intrusion, right? So we want to protect our privacy, what's going on in our mind. And there was an interesting case that was done in India, from India, in 2008. And what happened was an Indian woman was convicted of murder, and it was partially based on evidence from a brain scan. So they had a guy that had developed, an Indian scientist that had developed a brain scan. He was a witness. He was an expert witness at the trial, and he convinced the judge that the scan was a reliable information, and that it proved that she had knowledge of the crime. And there it was in her mind. I actually looked at that a little bit, and I think it's, and I personally feel like that's an example of what we call junk science. I don't think the technology was realistic at all, and that evidence should have been used to convict this woman. But I have no idea whether she's innocent or guilty. But that particular example was interesting because it happened. But on the other hand, I think that the technology wasn't reliable. So cognitive liberty and mental privacy, that's really important. Cognitive liberty is discussed among neural lawyers. I'm sure you're probably familiar that there's a field of law called neural law. You can take courses in neural law. There are legal case books on the topic of neural law. And we want people to be free, have the ability to be mentally free and make competent decisions regarding the use of neurotechnology, or once the neurotechnology is embedded within their mind. And we definitely are interested in a right to mental privacy to protect against the unconsented intrusion by third parties. So if you think, to give you an example of concern over third parties' access to implanted technology, a former United States Vice President, Dick Cheney, I think his name was, had a heart pacer, and it could be accessed wirelessly, and he had that disabled. He had that disabled because he was concerned, or that the government was concerned that a third party could access that and essentially kill him, disrupt the rhythms of his heart. So he had the wireless capability disabled because, again, the concern was that a third party could have potentially accessed it. So another aspect of cognitive liberty is called mental integrity. And so, for example, and we've looked at that. And so under international law, Article 3 of the European Union's Charter of Fundamental Rights is a right to mental health. And so that right could potentially be used to protect our mental integrity from a European Union standpoint, a European Court of Human Rights and all that. There's also something called a right to psychological continuity. And so really what that's talking about is that, I mean, we have a continuous cognitive framework in our mind, like, you know, through a sequence of time. And it's, you could potentially disrupt that. You could potentially disrupt the psychological continuity of a person by accessing these devices. And so we'd like that not to happen. And in this slide, I also show that they're something that I'm not myself particularly interested in, but just for the purpose of this talk. The militaries of various countries are very interested in creating what are called cyborg soldiers who have enhancements that increase their strength, increase their stamina, increase the length of time they can stay awake and be alert. And so there's a lot of money actually from governments being pumped into trying to create soldiers, you know, that have beyond human abilities, and they're making progress. Okay, so that's the gist of my talk. The main points I wanted to discuss. Technology is being implanted in the body, can be accessed by third parties. There are lots of interesting issues that are raised by that. I want to point out that the talk isn't, as I mentioned in the very beginning, it's not science fiction. There's lots of things that are going on. And we're living in a time of accelerating returns for technology. And so within the next 5, 10, 20 years, you know, this is going to be major issues, major problems. And we really want to be concerned that governments are not accessing devices in our mind. And I should have also given you the example of Elon Musk and the neurological technology that he's doing, and it's not just sensors that are a person's wearing on the top of their head, but the technology is getting smaller and smaller, and we're headed in the direction of actually being able to get chips in a person's brain, and it not being major brain surgery for Alzheimer's patients or somebody that's you know, locked into their body such that they can't move. And so obviously, if you're in that situation, you might be willing to try these technologies to try to give you some quality of life. But there seems to be a trend in the grinders, people that are implanting technology on their own. They're doing it on their own. They're not compelled to do that by anybody. So these are some major issues that I think that as an international community, I'd love to get more conversation on. And then from an international point of view, the president of the country, Chile is very interested in cognitive liberty. And if you were to Google the Chilean president and what they're doing in cognitive liberty, they're trying to take the lead and trying to get the world community involved and interested, and trying to get some regulations within their own country that are quite interesting as well. So thank you very much.
It was really very interesting. Do you have some time for asking and questionnaire? Because even all the slides are very relevant.
Thank you so much.
I have some questions. If you have time, yes. What do you think? I've read some of your papers. It was very productive for me, actually, because, you know, lawyers are not so technological like engineers, of course. And the most important question, I think, for legal aspects is about will, personal will of doing something or not. And maybe you can comment what should we do if some person had its implant had not only for medical ads, and maybe it will be controlled not only with this person. Have you any ideas about the situation? Maybe.
I mean, about a third party controlling the device?
Yes.
Essentially. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the major concern. I think that's a major concern because I mean, if you look at everything that's being done in surveillance with surveillance technology, I mean, we're being surveilled. We're on cameras all the time and everything. I mean, there are, and I mean, so we're being surveilled like, to use to use an American term. We're being surveilled like crazy, you know, all the time, and we're losing our privacy. And from a business, big tech, Facebook, Google, people like that, you can bet they want access to your mind. They want access to your thoughts. They are definitely moving in that direction. So I'm very concerned about it, and I'm very concerned about the issue of will and free will and things like that. And I think this is we're just at the beginning of these incredibly interesting issues being raised that we have to deal with. But from a technological point of view, I think it's not that difficult for lawyers to the legal community to really understand enough of this about this technology to be concerned. I mean, and to add the legal and the policy, appropriate legal and policy decisions to this type of technology. I don't think that's a problem. I mean, I think that, for example, in artificial intelligence, so many legal scholars write papers about artificial intelligence, but I mean, I don't think that they're writing software. You know, I don't think that they're sitting writing algorithms and writing software, but I think they're pretty good at you know, I mean, we're taking the law and we're fitting it into this type of technology. And I mentioned the government regulations that are regulating it already. And there are, you know, industry regulates technology as well to some extent. I mean, some of the big tech companies in the US have ethics boards for for their artificial intelligence projects so that it can be used ethically. But, you know, it remains to be seen where this technology is going to be headed. But for medical necessity, I mean, that's a good thing, right? You know, for people that are paralyzed and they can't communicate with loved ones and things like that, they can't access the internet. But what's really interesting is the movement towards the use of technology for non-medical purposes, you know, to create abilities to be able to access your mind to the cloud, to be able to learn foreign language, you know, just things like that. And for memories to maybe possibly say, for a memory to be a commercial product, actually what did some movie star, I want to, you know, somebody might want that memory, their memory of somebody that. So it's really interesting. It's sort of a direction that we seem to be headed in. And I don't know. And I think that free will is definitely an issue. And we're really going to have to be concerned with that. And we have to figure out a way with the technology itself in that. Well, yeah. By the way, Kevin Warwick, a professor in England, Kevin Warwick, W-A-R-W-I-C-K. Some people call him Mr. Cyborg because a long time ago, he implanted devices in his skin, a sensor, and his wife, he had a sensor implanted in her body as well, so that they could, you know where each other were located and things like that. But one of his graduate students, actually, with an implanted technology, actually implanted a computer virus in his body that affected the implantable device. So, I mean, you can only see the things that you can do with computer viruses. If that's done to the human body, that's going to be a major problem, of course.
Thank you. But in legal sphere, it's about risks Of course, you said that for business it's very important, but if you make some deals, it's necessary to understand, is it your brain and your personal will and free will, or maybe it's controlled for third parties, chips and AI programs and so on. And where is the point of responsibility? Who will be responsible for all this, not only deals, but crimes and so on?
Well, the people that are responsible now seem to be the government, governments, your government, my government, and industry. Industry has a tremendous amount of power, but a problem. So what you just mentioned made me think of something, which is, there are negative implications of the technology, to affect your cognitive liberty and free will.
Risks, of course. Yeah.
And all of that. And let's say we get to a point where you can have an implant that's, that's easy to put in your brain, that's easy to do. And it's then recording and so on. And then I think the question is, will people do it? Would people do it? So there would have to be a cost benefit analysis. It would have to be to the point where, look, my kids that are in school, but the other kids in school have a brain implant and they're learning calculus, they're learning advanced physics, math, and they're getting something from it, access to information. It's just like with the computer, we have to press, do you accept these terms, cookies, and we're going to use your information and sell it to somebody. It has to get to that point. It has to get to the point where the benefits, people view the benefits as outweighing the negatives. And that's an interesting question. I think that it very might get to that point. It very might get to the point where the people say the benefits outweigh the negatives. And it's hard to maybe see that now, because for the video I showed, the guy is paralyzed, and the brain implant he has is a serious medical procedure. I'm not getting near that. I don't want that to happen to my body. But again, I'm just saying that the trend is to miniaturize the technology, make it smaller, make it less intrusive, make it easier to get in your brain. We're just starting to do that. And the other video I would have showed circuits within a blood vessel within the brain itself, and being able to live there and for some length of time without damaging your brain. But what will people be willing to give up? How much of your will, how much of your privacy, what will you be able to give up for what you may be able to get in return? I doubt if we're going to get to a point where any government demands that a person, have a chip in their brain. In fact, there are some anti-chipping laws already. In the United States, we have some laws that prohibit an employer, for example, of making all the employees have an RFID chip or something that locates their position, because they would want to know, where their employees are when they're working, where are they located. Well, we have some laws that prohibit that, anti-chipping laws. So I don't know. So that's a really interesting question. That'd be an interesting question to write a paper about. Focus on where would the trade-offs be? What would you have to get in return in order to give up something? Because we give up stuff now all the time in order to access the internet and to acquire information.
And according to this opinion, it's very interesting for me. What about creativity? If somebody uses computer program, actually artificial intelligence systems, it's using these programs like tools. But if you've got some chips, some implants, will be you the author, or it will be, I don't know, ownership of developers. What do you think about this problem?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because if I would think that under current copyright law that you own your own thoughts. They're your thoughts. And let's see. That's interesting, because with patent law, at least in the U.S. patent system, you can't patent an abstract idea. You can't patent a law of nature. You can't patent things like that. So it can't be, you can't patent that. In terms of the authorship, I mean, I think you would own the authorship, the thing that your mind thinks of, whether, no matter where in the process, whether it's something you write down or earlier in the process of it existing in your brain, possibly you would own the copyright to that. It would get interesting though if an implant with artificial intelligence was in some way increasing your creativity or your ability to paint like Rembrandt or some master painter. That's a completely novel question that hasn't been addressed or hasn't really been discussed very much at all. So that's interesting. I have a friend that Ryan Abbott, he's with the University of Surrey in Great Britain, and I don't know whether you're familiar with his project, but he worked with a person who invented, there's a robot, I think it's a robot called Dabus, D-A-B-U-S,
yes,
I think.
it was the next question. What is your opinion on this Dabus case?
Well,
Do you think it's possible?
Right. So with Dabus, so there are different things under copyright law. You can, I mean, can you be listed as the inventor? Can you apply for the patent? And can you have the patent rights?
Yeah.
So Dabus, they've won a few cases where Dabus can be listed as the inventor. It can be listed as the inventor. They've won one or two cases, I think. One or two jurisdictions have said, okay, the AI can be listed as the inventor, but it can't be listed as the owner, and it can't apply. It can't apply. So it can't apply. It can't have the intellectual property rights associated with the invention, but it can be listed as the inventor. Okay, so I just wrote a chapter, for Ryan is editing a book now for somebody, and I wrote a chapter, and I said, I tried to extend the idea to the artificial intelligence having intellectual property rights as well. But anyway, yes, we're looking at, people are doing that. I mean, no jurisdiction will allow the AI to apply for a patent or to receive the patent right, or excuse me, have a copyright, or be the copyright author, or to have copyright rights. I mean, but since AI can completely invent without a human techniques and so on, it's hard to figure out who in the chain of command. So in a way, it's a way to get out of that dilemma by just saying, okay, let's let the AI be listed as the author, but too bad you can't apply for you're not the patent. You can't apply for a patent. You can't apply for copyright. You don't get any rights associated with that. But then, another argument is that AI and robots are not conscious beings. They currently don't intend to do that. I mean, we tell them to do it, and they're not incentivized. So from a policy point of view, intellectual property's purpose is to incentivize people to be creative. If you're going to add something to the humanity, to society, we'll reward you in the following ways. Well, currently robots don't have that ability, right? They don't need to be incentivized in that way. I mean, but if you think down the future, if you think about how things are developing, I mean, who knows whether we'll get to the point where AI will reach, well, what is called the singularity, right? The singularity, that point in time where artificial intelligence reaches or surpasses humans in general intelligence. And then, things will get very interesting, of course.
I absolutely agree that it's necessary in society, in legal field, discuss these problems for future, not for this level of the technology, because they can produce that in some years, maybe 10, but it's not a problem. we are making our laws for 10 years also. So what do you think about ethic problems? In many countries, they've got some so-called code of ethical application of artificial intelligence and so on. Yeah. You said about medical technologies for health being, and from time to time in different countries, they haven't any rules, but prepared some codes, something like soft law, What do you think about it? Is it possible? Is it useful? And will it be fruitful for developers and for society to make these rules like ethics?
I think it's absolutely 100% necessary for ethical rules and regulations to be part of the equation of regulating this type of technology. I mean, the ethical use of technology is, whether it's this type of technology or any type of technology, this is all technology is a double-edged sword. It can be used for good purposes or bad purposes. And so, yes, I completely think that the ethical issues are incredibly important. And people are writing about that. So it's not a topic that I personally write about, but there's quite a bit that's been written, and it's interesting. Yeah, so I mean, Google and Facebook and people like that, I think they have ethics boards associated, because I mean, really what they are is they're an artificial intelligence company. I mean, you can, they do what they do for commercial purposes, but they're all about artificial intelligence. I mean, they're an artificial intelligence company, and they have ethical boards associated with them, but there have been problems. People have dropped off their ethical boards because there's really a trade-off between what's ethical and what's commercial, how you can make money and what's ethical. And these are kind of issues that we've had to deal with in the past, and we're going to have to continue to deal with in the future. And so, maybe the United Nations, or maybe a more of an international organization, needs to develop a set of ethical standards, that applies across the board to all countries, and all countries become signatories, and we go forward that way. But I mean, if you have a personal concern for ethics with this type of technology and artificial intelligence, I definitely share that that concern and that interest with you.
I agree with your position. I think it's very important, but I think from time to time we can see that ethics and moral is different for different nationalities, for different countries. But
right.
the story about artificial intelligence, of course, is transnational, international, but not for different countries.
No, that's so interesting.
All of them.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Because I think Putin himself said that who controls artificial intelligence will control the world. Putin may have said that. I think he said that. And China is, and the United States, I mean, I think, and other countries view artificial intelligence as critical for the development of their economies and to remain a relevant world power, to be honest about it. And so, yeah, so I think that artificial intelligence is viewed as such an important technology among many different nations that I think that the ethical standards I think that they may be, as a result, weak, because I think there's too much of a motivation to be a world power, to be a rich nation, and all of that. And artificial intelligence seems to be the road to get there. Seems to be exploding. It seems to be the road to get there. So a lot of people are headed in that direction, and that's going to I mean, the way things have worked in the past, that's going to get in the way of I think rational and reasonable regulations. So I have some concerns on that issue.
And according to this question, what do you think about people with implants? If they use the implants, the power maybe not only for brain implant, but for parts of body, not to harm somebody, but the self. For example, for suicide actions and so on. Can we control it? Maybe it's controlled by developers according to this technology. Is it possible now, or maybe it's discussing in your sphere?
Did I get the question right? You want to know about people harming themselves with the technology?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, that's an interesting question, because part of the movement in cognitive liberty, and the cognitive liberty movement is not just about implant technology. In fact, a lot of it is about people that want to experiment with drugs and to change their cognition or change their emotional state by using drugs, and they would like the government to not be able to stop them from doing that. They want to have that freedom to do what their mind what they want to do. So yeah. So where would that power come from? The power of the government, or the power of someone to stop another person from harming themselves. So we have a police power under the U.S. Constitution. There's essentially a police power, and you can use the police power, for example, to make people get shots for coronavirus. So there's a power that exists somewhere to allow something to happen, right? The government has to have a power to make something happen. I mean, sometimes the power is legal power. It's in a constitution, and sometimes it's just force. Depends on what nation you live in. But that's really interesting, because that reminds me of the case that I was going to mention. The case was Dr. Sell, S-E-L-L. Dr. Sell was a dentist, and somehow or another, Dr. Sell had defrauded the government. So he had done something to, and he was arrested and brought to trial. So from the time that he was arrested to the time he was brought to trial, he was diagnosed as being schizophrenic, as being mentally ill. So the government, so in order to be held at trial, you have to be mentally competent. You have to be able to understand the proceedings. In order to have a fair trial. That's called your due process rights. So Dr. Sell, the government wanted to give him antipsychotic medication in order for him to be competent and understand the proceedings. Well, his lawyers argued that that was affecting his cognitive liberty, that the antipsychotic drugs were essentially changing the chemistry of his brain. And by doing that, they were turning him into a different person. That wasn't the Dr. Sell that was arrested. That was the Dr. Sell with the chemistry of his brain changed because he was under treatment for these antipsychotic medications. And so that was an interesting case. And, Dr. Sell was the name of the litigant. And I don't know, it's hard for me to think of people trying to damage themselves. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if I don't know, I'd have to think about that. I mean, would we want an algorithm be able to stop an algorithm from doing certain things, or I don't know. I mean, I guess we would I mean, with any type of procedure, if you get to a point where you know that this is going to harm, I mean, you only give a certain dose of a medicine, you don't take more than that, it could harm you. I mean, I guess I'm a little bit stumped with trying to answer that, because I intuitively, by common sense, I think we would want to have a way to stop a person from harming themselves. We certainly don't want a person to be able to access a device in another person. That's clearly going to be, a violation of the law. But to harm yourself, that's interesting. And that reminds me of something. There's a disease, I forget the name of the disease, but there's a disease that some people have that it's really hard to describe. They feel that a certain body part doesn't belong to their body. They say that arm that's not my arm. That hand, it just doesn't, it's not my hand. It shouldn't be there. And they've actually gone to different countries where it had the hand or the arm, had the hand amputated. Because, and then they feel like psychologically, they said, now I feel like I don't have a body part that doesn't belong to me. I mean, that's a very, very strange disorder. but they were able to do that to themselves. So I guess it's possible that a person would want to do incredibly bizarre things to their own consciousness or to their own mind. You know, I don't know. That's possible. That's a good question.
Our discussion is about maybe it will be, maybe not. And I'm very glad to hear that you are so oriented to use artificial intelligence for improving humans,
Right.
not for
Yeah.
destroying them.
Yeah. So here's the thought. You're right. So here's the thought on that. So if you think about it, so a human being has 100 billion neurons, 100 trillion synapses, and each neuron, maybe it operates at 10 bits per second. So if you multiply that out, you get a certain raw processing power, just an estimate, what do we call a back of the napkin calculation, a broad calculation, petaflop, exaflop, something around there, raw processing power. But we know that supercomputers are operating at that computing power now. They're operating at that computing power now. So the idea is that we're born with 100 billion neurons. Our children are going to be born with 100 billion neurons. Their children, our grandchildren's and great-grandchildren, because evolution has created us, and the birth canal will only let a certain size head get out of the birth canal. I mean, so evolution has created us with these remarkable abilities, but they're kind of static. I mean, we're going to have 100 billion neurons in the distant future, So that means that, let's say that we're very lucky and we have an IQ of 180, 190, 200, one of the smartest people, you'd be one of the smartest people in the world. But there isn't any reason why AI can't have it can't be an IQ of 20,000, 200,000, who knows what. So once it surpasses humans and programs itself and builds its own algorithms, and it seems to be headed in that direction. All right, so then the idea is that, one of the main reasons that some people are interested in this type of technology is that they don't want to be surpassed by artificial intelligence. And the idea is that, the artificial intelligence is our progeny. It's our future, it's our future human, so to speak. It's a future version of us. And so that brings up kind of the type of questions you've been asking, which is, what part of humanity would we like to see go forward in an artificially intelligent version of us? So would there be any biology to it whatsoever, or would it be all technological? But we are becoming more of a technological being under the influence of technology, more so than, writing out the process, very slow process of evolution, changing our body. But the idea is that, you get AI in the body, or somehow access the internet, access all that information to keep up with AI and not be surpassed by the abilities of artificial intelligence. That's an issue that some people are thinking about, and a motivation to try to do this. So I guess we wouldn't call that a medical necessity, but we might call it a human survival necessity. Anyway, I know that, again, it's a far-fetched idea to some people. I realize that. And so if ideas like this offend anybody, I personally don't mean to offend anybody by suggesting that we could someday, not be a biological being. But I'm just raising these issues because I'm just trying to follow the trends in technology and thinking about the legal issues, patent law, copyright, and the federal regulations of spectrum. And, we have regulations for chip production as well, chip production regulation law and all of that. So anyway, a lot of my ideas are in the book I wrote, Cyber Humans, Our Future with Machines. If you want more. And I have I have several papers that are open access in a journal called Philosophies that are free. You can just download them if you're interested. And also, I hope through giving this talk, one of my objectives is to make more contacts. At this stage of my career, I'm doing a lot of books, and editing and writing books, and I'm working with scholars from all over the world. And so China, Australia, Japan, Europe, you name it. And I find that very satisfying, rewarding. And so I hope that my Gmail address is listed. And if anybody hears this talk and is interested in forming a community or wants to work on projects together of interest to this talk, then I'd be happy to do that. That'd be great, in fact.
Thank you very much. I think many of our students, our audience, of course, will read your books and your papers as I've done it. It was really very fruitful for me. And so it's time. We have a lot of questions. So, Professor, thank you for your time, for your excellent lecture, for the discussion, answering the question. I hope that this will be only the first step to the cooperation between the Russian legal community and you and your colleagues, maybe, in understanding the impact of artificial intelligence on humanity at all in different spheres. Thank you so much, and it was a pleasure to me to be here and meet you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. I very much enjoyed it, and I hope to hear from people and hope to keep in contact with all of you. Thank you. Okay, I'll sign out.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.